Hello and welcome to the Private Directors Association virtual event titled Building Your Future Through Succession Planning and Execution. Easy for me to say. I'm Lisa Levy, the Arizona Chapter Events Co-Chair. I'd like to welcome the members of the Private Directors Association from across the network. And if you're a guest, welcome to the PDA experience. The PDA was formed in 2014 and is growing to be the premier professional association of private company directors championing board excellence. With over 3,500 members and more than 20 chapters nationwide, we are a growing community. The PDA provides a welcoming, diverse, and collaborative network of CEOs, business owners, and board members to advocate for boards of directors and advisory boards. Today's program will be recorded and archived on the PDA website in the coming days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Karen Mildenhall, the President and CEO of KM Leadership Solutions and the Arizona PDA Chapter Membership Co-Chair. But most importantly, today she's our moderator.
Thank you for that introduction, Lisa, and thank you for all of our participants, and thank you to our panelists. Our program today is intended to help you see succession planning and execution through a little bit different lens, and it's from the lens of fellow business owners, board members, and advisors to help you take the next steps in your succession strategy. And we have a dynamic panel today, and each of our panelists have different roles and in their organizations and have different organization dynamics, and they too are in different stages of their succession planning and execution. And I have over 30 years experience advising public and private not-for-profit boards and serving for over 20 years on boards. And I see succession planning and execution as one of the more critical risks that if well managed can add so much value, literally and figuratively, to the organization. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then they'll give us a little bit more personal insights into themselves. And then we're going to have a very conversational type of discussion here. But I'd like to start with Bradley Franz, known as Brad. He's an innovator and thought leader who has built 4 separate companies, 2 of which have been named multiple times in Inc. magazine as the fastest growing companies in the United States. He's a best-selling author of The Succession Solution, The Strategic Guide to Business Transition. Not only has he advised numerous owners and company leaders, he's also lived the nitty-gritty of succession. And we have Roy Kern Jr. He's a passionate builder and grower in the construction industry, known for being instrumental in significant infrastructure projects in the Eastern US and Canada. He is a 3rd-generation owner, leader, president, CEO of Equipment Corporation America, a 105-year-old company. And he is active in preparing the next gen of leaders at ECA. And we have Kurt Marsh. He's down to earth, and I've also learned that he's very generous and kind, especially when speaking about other people's golf games. And he's a value-building leader and a 40-year expert in the HVAC manufacturing and distribution industry. He's chair of the board, shareholder, and officer of Pittsburgh Air Systems Air Industrial, and served as general manager for 32 years prior to him being the chair of the board. So now, I've given the typical on resume sort of things. I'd like to have each of you share a little bit more about yourself and your companies, and give us a little bit better picture of where you're at in your succession plan. We'll start with the same order that I introduced you with, so that'd be Brad, Roy, then Kurt. Go ahead.
Karen, well, first, thanks for the invitation. Thanks to PDA. It's a pleasure to be here. The Succession Coach is a consulting firm that has developed a unique succession planning process for closely held business owners that help them not only survive, but increase in value through this process. Me personally, although I've been doing this for about 25 years, it was only about 10 years ago I started this consulting firm because this process that I developed didn't traditionally fit within the law firm model where I was working. So that's how I started this consulting firm. As far as my background, I could go on and on and on, but time doesn't permit that. I say that jokingly, of course, but an investment banker said something very nice to me a number of years ago that I think is probably appropriate. He said, Brad, you've probably sat at every seat at the table from a business perspective, whether it's an attorney, a CPA, a board member, an entrepreneur, a coach. So it's not that I'm smarter than anybody else. I've just seen it from a number of different perspectives. And that's what I try to do when I talk to business owners about succession planning.
Thanks. Roy.
Well, I'd like to thank PDA also for allowing me to share my experience in succession planning. I am CEO of Equipment Corporation of America. ECA is a distributor specializing in foundation construction equipment. That's a small niche in the huge construction equipment world. But our machines basically drive or drill piling under major structures like bridges, high-rise buildings, warehouses, retaining walls, and stadiums. I think we've been on virtually every stadium east of the Mississippi in some form. Our equipment's been on in some form or another. We have 9 full-service facilities throughout Canada and eastern United States. Full service meaning that we provide sales, service, parts, and rental support out of those facilities. And they're in major metro areas, places like Toronto, Vancouver, Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Jacksonville. We've got 2 sales offices additionally, one serving New York City and the other serving Greensboro area in the Carolinas. We have about 150 employees. Our revenues are approximately $150 million. We are 106 years old now, officially. So we gained a year on the 105. I'm 3rd generation owner and president. I succeeded my father, who was president 24 years ago. I have 38 total years in the business. I spent the first 14 years of my career in sales, and I still love to sell. That's my one of my major functions. And we're very lucky to have a very capable young man, Rod, my son, who represents the 4th generation. He's 32, well-educated, also very experienced in our industry. So he's kind of the heir apparent. Structurally, the company's an S corporation. 90% of our shares are non-voting. 10% are voting. I am the sole shareholder. I'm 63 years old. And I kind of feel like I'm on the 20-yard line. I've been working with Brad for about a year and a quarter, putting together a plan, and I can see the end zone, and I want to go for the touchdown. And I know there's a lot of things that have to happen to make that work. And we have a plan put together, and we're in the implementation phase, doing things like actually getting the trust. The trust we put together is finished. I'm getting approval from all my family members. I'm in the process of that right now. And of course, we also worked on quite a bit with our employees and succession planning there, and all that's just being implemented as we speak.
Thank you. And happy birthday, another year. Make it 106 years.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Kurt, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization.
So the company is Pittsburgh Air Systems Air Industrial, and we started the Pittsburgh Air Systems portion in 1991 with 3 guys, myself and 2 others. And then we merged or brought on board another fellow in 2002 at the Air Industrial Park. So we were 4 independent owners. We're all equal owners. And then we bought out one of our fellow shareholders. And then we were contemplating what would be the next step. When we initially started the business, we had defined a lot of the processes to sell the business when somebody retired. And as we looked that over, well, those were great ideas in 1991. But as time went on, we discovered that maybe with the size of the company, it had grown significantly. that there would be better ways. So we contacted Brad had been our corporate attorney for many years, and we started talking about this probably in the 2012 timeframe. And we looked at a variety of options. We looked at selling it internally, selling it externally, hiring a manager and not selling it at all. What we finally ended up doing is we formed an ESOP, and in 2020, the company became 100% an ESOP. 100% of the shares were sold to the Pittsburgh Air Systems ESOP Trust. So since that time, the ESOP has been tremendously successful. The share value has gone up almost tenfold since the first valuation. So it's been very successful. It certainly hasn't been without pain, but it was a right process for us, and it took a long while to get there, but we wouldn't have gotten anywhere if we hadn't started planning early.
Thanks for sharing that background as well, Kurt. Now, as I mentioned before, this is going to be conversational. I'll be directing some questions to individuals. I encourage you to build on each other's answers, just like we would if we're sitting on a round table. But I have a challenge for the participants in this call. So not the panelists, but you probably will anyway. The challenge is I want each person who's participating in today's program to discover one thing from this discussion that you will utilize in your private company and your own succession strategies. So look for your one thing as we have this great discussion. Now, there's so many different approaches to succession planning and execution. Hey, Brad's written a book about it. But before we go into some of our Q&A, I asked Brad to help us put succession planning and execution in a particular context, a framework for us. So Brad, would you share that context with us, those 6 stages in your succession toolkit, kind of help us lay some of the context out of succession planning?
Sure. If the PDA assistant can put up that slide, I think it would be helpful that we talked about. But while we're waiting for that slide to come up, there was a book, although I developed my process before this book came out. Keith Cunningham wrote a book, Down the Road Less Stupid, and he explained strategic planning is real simple. And I want to use this as a setup to the 6-step process. He said strategic planning is simple. What you do is you identify where you want to go. You identify where you are. You identify what's in your way, because if there was nothing in your way, you'd be there already. You build a machine to overcome it. You turn it on and see how it works, right? So this succession planning process that I've developed is really a form of strategic planning, right? There are 6 stages real quickly. The first stage is a purpose stage. Well, we identify the principles of the organization, what's our ultimate vision, and why do we have that vision, right? And that's really important, because there will be, as Kurt indicated, challenges along the road. And if you don't have core principles and values to rely on, it's going to be hard, right? The second step is I call it the discovery stage. Determine your current situation. I use the red dot as an example of when you go into a mall, and I'm not a mall person, you get lost, right? You look for that big block, you look for the red dot and say, this is where you are, right? Because you need to know where you are before you can get started. Then the next stage, which I think is probably one of the most important stages, is, okay, we know where we want to get to, we know where we are, what's in our way. I don't have enough money to retire. My partner doesn't like the next generation of owners coming in. Whatever they are, you need to identify them, what strengths we have, and if we get this right, what will it look like? Well, we'll be able to recruit people. We'll be able to retain people, right? Then I say, okay, we know where we want to go. We know where we are. We know what's in our way. If we're sitting here 3 years from today, what would we like to see have accomplished to feel good about our progress? And that's kind of our long range plan, because it's harder to look out more than 3 years, but you can. Then you say, okay, if this is what our long range plan, our 3-year plan is, what do we want to have accomplished in the next year to move us closer to our 3-year plan, to move us closer to our vision? And then lastly, another good book called The 12-Week Year. The authors talk about we all should plan our lives around 12 weeks. It's long enough to get stuff done, but short enough to keep our eye on the ball. So I say, okay, if this is what we want to do in a year, over the next 90 days, what can we do? What 2, 3, 4 tasks can we do to move us closer? And if you follow this process and you meet quarterly, it is remarkable what you can accomplish in a year. You know, what was that line Bill Gates once said? Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and they underestimate what they can do in 10. We keep a cadence to it, and it's really surprising and rewarding what actually can be accomplished.
Thanks for that context. Now, I want to also challenge our participants. While you're in mute, if you have any questions, please enter your questions into the chat, and I'll do my best to get those questions addressed. So we've got this 6-step process that Brad's outlined. I think it gives us a really good context. I'm going to step back a little further, and Ray, if you want to take that slide down, would really appreciate that. Now, I am a family business owner. I'm healthy. Everything's going great. The business is going great. And my board is in place. They're doing a great job. They give me great ideas. Do I need a succession plan? And why? What do you think, panelists? Do I need a succession plan?
The sooner the better.
Oh, so, but I kind of have this resistance. It almost makes me feel like I'm admitting my mortality to say I need a succession plan. So what are some of the benefits and the risks of not starting on the succession planning process and then starting on a succession planning process? What do you think, Roy?
Well, Karen, it's funny you mentioned mortality, because that's one of the things I thought about it as I turned 61 and was kind of looking at it down the road as to what would happen to myself and maybe even more importantly to my company. And I just felt like it was important to try to figure out which direction we were going to go in. I'm a firm believer in strategic planning. My company started growing like a bad weed about 20 years ago, and I struggled to keep up. And the answer was strategic planning, and we do regular 5-year plans. We're on our 4th plan now, and it really gives us a blueprint as a company and all the managers in the company to move forward in the same direction. So that's from a strategic planning standpoint, very important. And I think just for peace of mind, and I'm yourself, of course, your family, more importantly, maybe even for your employees, your suppliers, your bank, they all want to know where your company's going. And I kind of made a decision I wasn't going to work forever. I'm going to work for a while longer, certainly, probably another 5 years or so, 5, 6 years. But you need that peace of mind moving forward as to how the transition is going to happen. And if you wait till you're 70 to make that decision and want to be retired at 72, I think you're behind the 8 ball quite a bit.
Karen, if I can give you an economic reason, there was a study done by the Boston Consulting Group a number of years ago. And the report basically said companies that have a documented succession plan are typically worth 1 to 2 turns in value from an EBITDA standpoint. So that, if you have a potential buyer, they're going to want to know what your succession plan is, not just with respect to ownership, but with respect to management as well. I mean, I tell people that there's 3 parts of succession, right? There's a succession of knowledge, management, and ownership. And I think they go in that order, right? You've got to help transfer that knowledge, those principles, those values to even a person that's starting day 1, right? We show up on time. We work 5 days. We come to the office 5, whatever that is, right? And then, it's a succession of management because, the Fred Smith at FedEx once said, we have 2 spots for every key management person behind them, right? It's just, it's good business in my opinion.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Kurt. Oh, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, one of the things that you were talking about is succession plan and when to start it. And I said the sooner the better. And one of the reasons is you can go down a path that you think is a great path and then discover that maybe that path really doesn't work for you. And we had that exact experience. We said, hey, look, we're going to go outside the company. We're going to hire a manager. This is going to be our next generation of top leadership. And that didn't work. And whether it was with the wrong person, the wrong process, or whatever, it was, we had started early enough so we had time to change our thought process. And we ended up choosing one of the, somebody from a different division in the company to be the overall leader of the company. And that turned out to be the right decision. So it's, the sooner the better. And that gives you a little extra time to maybe not do it the best the first time. I hate to say that, but that's
It can
just the
happen.
reality.
It can happen with strategy. It happens with succession strategy.
Yep.
So let's say, okay, I want to start this process. What does it take? What are some of the most important initial steps? It's a green field for me. Where do I start?
Yeah. And by the way, it often is very difficult because there's so much information noise out there. You should do this. This is succession planning. No, you need to do this. And I think the first step is to try to educate yourself, obviously, in the process, but make a commitment or make a decision to start, right? There's a quote in my book from Don Shula. It's the start that stops most people. I met with Roy a year before we started the process. We had breakfast, and he wanted to talk about it. He read my book, and it takes a while even to get started, but he made a decision to get started.
Yeah, I think finding a good consultant is the first step. But in that process, though, I did read a bunch of books on succession planning to try to get a feel for what the process would be like and what I needed to think about. And if you go back a step before that, I think you have to be in a position to start to think about succession planning. And in my situation, I had to buy out my siblings and wasn't really able to start doing that until about 10 years ago. And it took me 6-7 years to pay that out and get debt free to the point where I could worry about what I was going to do with my estate and with the company stock and the company moving forward. So you have to be in a position, I think, to start thinking about it. And some of the first steps involved in the process were, doing evaluation. I sent everybody on my company committee, task force, succession task force, a copy of Brad's book and had them read it before we had our first meeting with Brad. They all loved that. We reviewed
So did Brad.
Yeah, we reviewed company bylaws, ended up having to rewrite that, and I actually had to fire my wife off the board of directors of my company because I soon found out that there was a lot of liability to our joint assets with her on the board. So those were some of the first things I did.
Well, that sounds like you had some interesting challenges that you worked through on that. And that there's some things, while it could be a green field, and Brad, you had mentioned there could be a lot of noise. Maybe your financial planner saying one thing, an attorney saying another thing. You have an advisor that's saying something else. What resources do you need to really help you do an effective job in creating a succession plan and executing it in a way that, it takes you to where you want to go? What resources do you need?
Kurt, you want to try to take that?
Yeah, I first wanted to talk a little bit about noise. And, I think, Brad, you were talking about noise from the standpoint of maybe other professionals and, the idea of what needs to be done for succession planning. But I think at least for us, and maybe for many businesses, one of the big pieces of noise is just business. You're already doing succession planning, or you're already doing strategic planning in your business. And then this is another add-on. And so you're saying to yourself, look, I'm just trying to grow the company. So one of the things that was good about having a process was that because of this process, it was we were able to keep our eye on the ball. So there's lots of noise that prevents you from doing many things in business. This is one that's such a long-term process that it's important to get something nailed down that's very periodic, that is continually reminds you of keeping your eye on the ball. So that was that comment.
Thank you. Yeah, noise can come from everywhere.
But what's
Even
that saying by Dwight Eisenhower? Yeah, the important is seldom urgent, and the urgent is seldom important.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Roy, you shared some of the challenges you faced as you began the succession process. Kurt, you mentioned going down a road that you said, whoa, this isn't the right road for us, and had to retrack, regroup, and start to go down another road. There is, from what I've seen in the whole succession planning process, as you're identifying, as Brad had said, that third step of identifying obstacles, strengths, opportunities, kind of like the SWOT analysis in a way, that to me is where you get the most concerns and conflicts that can come up. What are some of the ways you have faced, resolved, or overcome some of those conflicts that come up through this planning process?
Well, open communication, I think, was very important, and we encourage that in all of our meetings, and my team really responded to that. And there were some instances where things got a little, people were concerned or whatever, and we had to talk our way through that. And I think you have to be flexible too, right? You have to look at things from their perspective, and from everyone's perspective, so that you can come to a consensus. It happened a lot, actually. Every meeting there was something serious to discuss that there were a couple of sides on.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's always stress.
Yeah,
Just
well,
that
I will add, and I know it sounds self-serving, whether it's me or anybody else. When you have someone in the room that's not part of the organization, they can have more adult conversations, and I say that half jokingly, right? And I don't mean to embarrass Kurt. In his organization, he was a bigger than life individual. He was both one of the strengths and one of the obstacles, right? How do we replace Kurt? And he was one of our strengths. The fact that we gave ourselves enough time, a leader emerged through a difficult process, but one did.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, Karen, and Brad, you also talked a little bit about was, okay, what's important to you? What's important to the organization? So the process looks different if the succession idea is that I'm going to maximize the financial return on this business versus, hey, I'm going to save this business for my kids, or I'm going to have this business for the employees because that's just what we did, and we want this business to continue for the next 100 years. So, the first step is, okay, what's your goal? And if your goal is financial, then the process is probably, well, Brad, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the process is probably a little more straightforward to maximize the financial return. Now, ideally, certainly in our perspective, we wanted to make sure the company continued, and it continued in a successful way and continued to grow. And the financial aspect was important, but not paramount. So those are the kinds of decisions that you look at and say, okay, where are we going and how are we going to get there with this criteria?
if I could just piggyback on Kurt there, you know, we looked at goals were very important. And in my case, there's a legacy, company legacy, 100-year-old business, third generation, love to move it on to the fourth generation, assuming that made sense, and keep the business going, right? So that was one of our major things. And then another biggie was taking care of our employees, especially key employees. Employees are like family in my business, and that was very critical. So, you know, if we were going to sell the business, you know, we'd have to be very careful who we were selling the business to, you know, those kind of things. And then thirdly, for me, it was just a comfortable retirement. And I could do a big score if I sold the business, but that wouldn't quite equate with the first, the other two goals. And frankly, I don't need that. So a comfortable retirement was kind of the third thing we had in mind. And then the other thing in like conflict resolution, one of the first things we did with Brad was go over our core values. And when you have core values like honesty and integrity and a whole long list of others, we spent a good amount of time whittling those down to, you know, 3 or 4 key things. And when you draw back on those during the discussions, it becomes a little easier to kind of go through the tough periods.
Mhm.
And Karen, just one last thing I'd like to add with Kurt and Roy is sometimes people don't know if they want to sell. And as opposed to, hey, I got this letter in the mail, someone wants to buy my company. And a year later, they say, why did I do this, right? And I believe if you go through some form of process, it doesn't have to be mine, some form of process, you have greater peace of mind that you made the right decision.
Right. And or you're not being forced to make a decision.
Right.
Yeah, that you're in control of some of that. Because sometimes in life, there are different things that can happen that they don't fit the plan. Like something unexpected or unscheduled event or something with one of the key people
Yeah.
on your leadership team. How do you deal with some of those unexpected things that may be impacting your succession plan? What are some of the approaches for that?
Roy and Kurt?
Yeah.
Well, we had you know, as I mentioned earlier, we went down the path of trying to hire from the outside a manager, basically somebody that was going to run the business for us as we moved towards retirement. And that didn't work. And really, the only thing we could do is back up from that and say, okay, well, maybe this isn't the right process for us. Maybe this was something we thought we could do, but didn't really understand it as deeply as we needed to make that decision. And there's no recovery other than, hey, look, we made a mistake. We have to move on, try something different. Do some analysis, figure out why it didn't work. Was it us, the current leaders of the company? Was it the people we hired? Was it just not the right process for us? So I don't think there's much choice when you have something unexpected, and whether it's, you know, somebody's health issue, whether it's you know, somebody's family decided they needed to do something else, or if it's your plane didn't work properly. You know, the only thing you can do is kind of, you know, cinch up the straps and move forward. But part of that process of starting early enough is invaluable. One of the things I wish we had done, which we did not do, was I wish we had built our next generation of leaders much more aggressively. We didn't, you know, possibly because I have some control issues. But I think we would have been better off if we'd started building leaders internally. And we're a small company, building leaders internally much earlier.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know that we ran into a ton of obstacles along those lines, but we did have a couple of surprises. One, I was really surprised at how excited the employee team was to be involved in the process. I don't think they expected that. And to ask 6 or 7 of them into a room every quarter and to go back and do homework and put the extra time in, travel into Pittsburgh. My company's spread out all over the place. The leaders that I chose on that team are, from across 2 countries. So the excitement level being invited into that team was a surprise to me. And then the other thing was how hard it was mentally for me to lay out my financials in front of my financial advisors and legal team. And many of them knew bits and pieces of my situation, but you have to really suck it up and put it out there. And once it's done and it's fine. But that was a little nerve-wracking to me in the process. Just kind of accepting that and going ahead out and laying it out. So
Darren, if I can add to
2
that,
surprises I ran into.
if I
Okay.
can add that, if there's one common thing that surprises me is how many successful business owners don't know what they need to exit the company. When I say, hey, what's your number? I don't know what my number is, so that's a really important analysis that Roy did and you need to do, whether you're gifting, selling, or whatever combination that there is. You've got to know, because you go from, I like to say, control income to contract income.
Mhm.
When you're in control of the company, you control your income. When you sell or gift, now it's a contract, right? And there's no do-overs oftentimes. So that's one thing I would suggest to business owners, to determine what that number is for them. And it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a unique situation too. I have like $13 million worth of tax loss carry forwards because we're a very capital intensive business, and that had built up over time because of bonus depreciation. And that factored into that, in the S Corp status of our business, kind of factored into all my financial decisions in one form or another. And so it's important to look at all the aspects of your financial situation, your personal financial situation, when you're looking at an exit plan. Because there, things like, that $13 million, if I don't use that, it's gone. My wife can't use it. My business can't use it. It's got to be Roy Kern that uses that. So you had to develop a trust and everything, where the S Corp status, the tax status continued to flow through me, so that I could utilize it, $13 million in tax loss carry forwards.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Kurt.
I was going to say, Roy, you mentioned that you had a group of your employees that were part of the succession planning process, or are part of the process. And I think that's awesome. The worst thing that can happen is people are in the dark. They don't know what's going on. Obviously, you can't share everything, but it's good to engage folks. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, we didn't share everything, but we shared quite a bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially from the perspective in the private companies with boards. So Kurt, you're the chair of the board for your organization, and that puts some additional responsibility that is shared about succession. So what are some of the ways the board has supported the organization in that whole succession planning and execution process?
Yeah, the complexion of our board has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. So initially it was the 3 shareholders basically was our board. When we became an ESOP, part of that process was to get some outside board members. So now we have 5 board members. And frankly, I wish we had gone through that expansion of the board years ago, because we have a couple of really, really sharp people on our board. And that's helped our company and has helped really kind of in the back end of the succession process with our new leadership and what they're doing and how we can help guide them. So from that perspective, we're much better off organization with this new board than we were before.
Mhm. It seems that next iteration of the board really helped you further gel that succession process and plan, because it seemed with that strength.
Yeah, a succession plan is something you got to work on before it happens, while it's happening, and after you think you're done. It's not just, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to hire a manager, we're going to sell stock, we're going to do this. That's a transaction. The succession process really starts way before then and continues significantly after that transactional period.
Now, I'm one of those kind of people that when I've determined I'm going to get something done, I just like get it done, you know?
Check that box.
Yeah, check the box, get it over with. And from what I'm hearing from the three of you, this isn't something you check the box. This is something you go through a process, that you work the process and you rework it and you keep it vibrant as you work with a team. But are there any of these steps that, because I'm so anxious and determined, that I can skip and I'll still be okay?
Well, I would tell you that the more you skip, the more you increase the risk of failure. So, if you want to skip, you can. I tell people all the time, this is your plan, not my plan. But I think that, I didn't create kind of fundamental strategic planning. It was, developed in the 40s. There's a reason why it's worked so well over the years. And so, I think that you can, but you wouldn't get that recommendation from me.
Well, and there's some things, and of course, we've been working very long time with Brad. There's some things about this process. One of the things where you do a lot of review of some of the things we've gone through, and sometimes I think our team got a little tired of talking about our core values, but if you don't reaffirm them when you are in the process of planning for the future, then are you going to make the right decisions associated with what you really believe? And do you really believe it, right? And there was a period of time where we started out with some of these thought processes, like what's most important to us. And over time, those changed slightly, not a lot, but a little bit. So, there's a lot of step-by-step process, checking individual boxes. But I think I agree with Brad that if you really aren't rigorous about this, your result is not going to be what you want it to be.
I think the process, and process is the key word, I think, is the process gives you time to vet the various decisions you're making and the various options you have. And if you don't follow the process, then you're not going to be vetting things the way you should, and you're going to make mistakes. I wouldn't recommend it either, Brett.
You said it just the way I wrote it.
Yeah, well, let me.
Checks in the mail, Brad.
Okay, well, how about if I reframe the question in a little bit different way? In this experience that you have undertaken of developing the succession plan, the strategy, you're executing it, has there been a step that you found that it has been the most important to you, that has been most revealing or impactful for you?
I don't know if I can come up with one.
Okay, give me a few then.
I can give you probably one that is one that doesn't, I think in general is one that people won't follow unless there is a process. And that is, okay, making a commitment to what's going to get done in the next 3 months, the next year, or the next 3 years. And having that continual reinforcement of what those commitments are helps move the process along. So maybe that is the most critical thing, Karen, and to have that commitment that, hey, look, the team is looking towards that individual who is supposed to be doing that task or that part of the process. and keeping people on task is really important.
The joke, if I can, I like to say is, the saying, if you want to improve something, measure it. If you want to improve something exponentially, measure it and have somebody report out in 90 days. You'd be surprised what gets done.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
because of Drucker.
I thought the most important step was the next meeting. And
And
for that very
Absolutely.
reason, everyone had to do their homework. They knew they were going to put up a PowerPoint on the screen and talk about it, and they had to be prepared, and that forced everyone to do the homework. And I agree that, that one, quarter, 3 months, that's a perfect time. Okay, you can put it aside for a month, but you can't put it aside for 2.5 months and
Mhm.
expect to come in with a reasonable presentation. So that's a good time period, I'd say, between sessions.
Another thing I thought was interesting in what Brad did, and I hope I'm not letting secrets out here, Brad. We'd have a meeting quarterly, or sometimes we didn't quite make it quarterly, but anyway. And then, we'd have these tasks we were supposed to perform and get accomplished. And then we'd have, okay, what are we going to do to celebrate that we did that?
Mhm.
We did have some nice dinners after some of these meetings. Usually Brad bought.
Usually.
Ultimately, you did.
Yeah, that's right. So
Precisely.
But here's some of the things I'm hearing from you, from your experience with the whole succession strategy. One, I've heard start early, and perhaps start earlier than you thought.
Absolutely.
Two, I also heard that you got to be vulnerable and know this process requires you to really closely examine what your goals are from many facets. And within that vulnerability, Roy, you brought out, it's like you got to lay it all out there, financials, everything. And I heard from Brad as well, is be able to articulate those goals. So what's your number? What your goal has to be for your retirement, for example, you got to know what that looks like. So the whole vulnerability and the knowledge that comes with it once you put it together. I also heard from you how powerful it is to have open dialogue, that honesty and that commitment amongst the people that are involved in this whole succession process. And that power of having those goals and those milestones on the 3-month basis, and that accountability that comes with that too. So as we look at where you're at on the road right now of your business's succession, and you reflect, and somebody were going to you as if, oh, you are the wise one of all of this experience. Let's give some advice to board members. Board members, what would you tell a board member that they could do to add value through the company they are a part of their board? What would you suggest they do to help?
I would say start looking at your leadership team immediately, and what's the plan, and what's the plan, what's the time frame, and then step 2, or maybe in parallel, is look at the board. What's the plan for the board? What's the succession planning for the board? So I would say just start that process, be aware of it, and be strategic about when you want to make it happen.
I guess I would want to make sure that the board's goals were the same as upper management's goals, and and somehow get that all in alignment. And then as a director, I think you have to bring your expertise, whatever it may be, to a lot of those decisions. Those quarterly meetings. There's it's not just upper management succession. There's middle management. You got to look at your bench strength. You've got to, how are you going to retain key employees? all of these kind of things, come into play, and whatever an outside director can bring in, expertise wise, is only gonna help things and move it along. But getting the goals the same, I think, would be important.
Yeah, Karen, I think, from a board's perspective, if you look at sort of the fundamental responsibilities of the board, there are few, right? Hire the CEO, review and approve the strategic plan, and I think it's succession. And I think as a board member, it's a fiduciary responsibility to ask, I mean, I don't suggest you do it, but ask, what are we doing from a succession plan standpoint, whether it's management and or ownership? I mean, sometimes just asking the question starts the process. So that would be the takeaway that I would get from, what is it that a board member should be doing from a succession planning standpoint? Engage the conversation.
Mhm. Thank you. All great suggestions. We also have participants on this call that are in their company's senior leadership team. What advice would you give them as a part of your experience of succession planning and execution? So these are some of the senior leaders. These are the ones in the trenches working with you. What would you advise them?
I'd advise them to be open and honest.
I will tell you, in talking to hundreds of senior management people, when I ask them, what are you looking for with respect to this succession planning we're about to get started? And they say, Brad, all I want to know is what's the plan? Uncertainty creates anxiety, right? And business owners don't appreciate all the questions that senior management has in the back of their mind. So to Roy's point, be open and honest. But this is really, really important for senior management.
Yep. Again, and they've got to drive it.
Yeah. They're seeing it through. Yes. Now, before I wrap up, I want to encourage the people participating in this call. I challenged you to identify one thing from this conversation that will help you in your succession strategy, whether it's the planning, you're in the execution of it. And I encourage you to share what your one thing is in the chat. I believe that we've covered the questions that people have posed. And if there are any other questions, I invite you to get those in now. But I want to add a special thanks to Kurt Marsh, Roy Kern, and Brad Franz for their generosity with us and how they've opened up their minds and their hearts and their experience in sharing about their organization's succession journey. And I want to thank each one of you for being willing to do that. So here's some of the things that people have suggested that what their one thing was. Ask the first owner what and when is their plan, and then senior leadership once public. Have the commitment to stay on task with the process. Be aggressive with the next gen leaders. Build internally much earlier and immediately. These people participating are internalizing your advice. So thanks again, Brad, Roy, and Kurt. Would you have any other final comments you'd like to share before we sign off?
Karen, the only thing I was going to say was, I know there were a number of questions. I don't know if we got to them all. Anybody that wants to contact me as a fellow PDA member, happy to talk to them and answer any questions that they may have. They can reach me if you just Google thesuccessionsolution.com, or it's Brad at thesuccessionsolution.com. They can. I'm happy to help them. So
thank you. And your book is available on Amazon.
Thank you. In audible form as well.
I know, I got it.
You didn't read it though, did you, Brad?
No, not too many times. Thanks, Karen.
But thank you, everyone. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and continuing on your successful succession. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.